I don't usually do this, but I really want to do this today. It's about today's guest. So today, John Stapleton and I are honored to have on one of the sharpest voices uh, on international security, nuclear risks, UN reform, and multi-power plays. Emeritus Professor, I think I said that wrong, Ramesh Thakur. From his roots in India and Canada, Ramesh has held top roles across 4 continents, including founding the Center for Nuclear Non-Proliferation at ANU, serving as the UN Assistant Secretary General, and co-authoring the landmark Responsibility to Protect report. With over 50 books, 400 articles, and that rare blend of insider expertise and straight talk, it's going to be a privilege to have him in the cafe today with John. But we'll start with a song, and then we'll be back with the professor.
When I met Jesus Christ, he was almost 10 years old, and he was helping his mother push a trolley full of all they owned. And because they couldn't find an inn they could get in, they were heading to the city and leaving Bethlehem. Couldn't you perform a miracle? I'm out of them, he said. I tried turning nothing into warmth, but it just made my mother cry. It just made my mother cry. Mary Magdalene has become a man, and tonight he's old, and she has been riding my tram. Now it's late and she's trying to sleep beneath a poster for a bank. Your dreams are important to us as it bathes her face in gold. Come give us your natural gifts, we make wealth from toil. Come pretend for history's page that we're advancing Australia fair. Let's pretend that we're all advancing Australia fair. Back down the road I found the church we built on the black man's bones was empty, and out the front a sign read all but sold. A sign read all but sold. And we all owe so much money, but to whom we're not quite sure. So head down, we just keep running along our fading golden shores. So head down, we just keep running along our fading golden shores. Come give us your natural gifts, we make wealth from toil. Come pretend for history's page that we're advancing Australia fair. Let's pretend that we're all advancing Australia fair.
Okay, I'll quickly bring in my co-host, John. John Stapleton, looking fantastic and handsome as always.
Amazing what AI can do, huh?
Okay, shall we bring in the great man? Let's bring him in.
Yes, Ramesh.
Yes, 3 old geezers by the looks of us.
Oh dear, I just feel all over the floor, so I'm trying to dodge it.
Could I just start with one question, which is not going to be about the book, but it's really fascinating because of your position in the UN. what is life actually like in the United Nations when you get in there? What's it actually like? Or when you first went in there, was it what you expected, or was it just, I don't know?
Well, I think I started off with three big advantages. One was I was very fortunate in the Secretary General of the organization when I entered, Kofi Annan. I think by general agreement, the UN has had two and only two outstanding secretaries general. And it is important we call them secretaries general because they're not generals. One was Dag Hammarskjöld from Sweden, the second SG, and the other was Kofi from Ghana. I was fortunate in that. And in particular, the fact that he gave me full backing for my right and indeed responsibility to speak publicly on controversial issues while I was in the UN. I'll give you just one quick example because it is relevant even to what we do later. I had more than 50 op-eds published in the International Herald Tribune, as it used to be, at a time when that was combined Washington Post and New York Times, the international edition. It was unquestionably the most prestigious and the most influential international publication while it lasted. It had enormous range and influence. It gave me enormous visibility. It gave me guaranteed access to anyone in the world, any leader of any country that I wanted to speak to. And because I write on contemporary issues, and by definition, the leading issues tend to be contentious and controversial because it involves conflict and dissension. The condition that Kofi imposed on me was I would not send them articles in advance for clearance because they wanted not just plausible deniability, but truthfully they wanted to be able to say that they had not read it in advance. And second, every article had to carry the disclaimer at the end that the opinions were my personal views, did not reflect either the institution I work for directly or the United Nations overall. And they generally did that once they failed to put that in, and I wrote to them and said, look, if you forget that, then I'm not allowed to write for you. Now, I was the only person in the history of the UN who was able to get away with that.
Wow.
More than 50 articles, not a single one vetted in advance, a lot of them very controversial, a lot of them attracted formal complaints to the Secretary General in New York. And he worked out a standard formula. He said, look, before you tell me the name of the person, I think I can guess. Is it so-and-so? Yes, it is. Well, you're not the first, and I'm sure you will not be the last. But you know what? He's the vice rector of the United Nations University that has its own charter, which guarantees its institutional autonomy and academic freedom. We are not going to interfere with that. If you have complaint, why don't you take it up with the rector of the United Nations University, his direct boss, and see where they go. And a lot of them would leave it at that because a lot of them were just pro forma. Some would actually take it up, and then the rector would say, well, that's very interesting. Your opposite number in the world, so they're complaining about me as an Indian. They said, did you know that the Pakistan government has complained about him in the past on this article? And if it was a Pakistani ambassador, he'd say, you'll be pleased to know that the Indian government thinks he's a traitor to India. That's what they keep telling me, etc. So that formula worked. So that was important for me, the fact that I had a Secretary General who believed in free speech, believed in the importance of getting the issues on the ground, and took advantage of the identity of my institution as a university to play that out. And in turn, he then appointed me to write his reform report, and I became reasonably close to him. Because he learned to trust my judgment on terms of exactly where the line was. So I would say things that needed to be said, but not cross it to the point where the UN felt I had become rogue. So in a sense, he used me for that purpose, and obviously with my full awareness and consent. Mm-hmm. And it became very useful for him to keep me in that position and then use me later on. Second thing he liked was my grasp of world affairs and the place that the United Nations should occupy in shaping international discourse and policy. and third, my ability to comprehend, compress, and then articulate for the intelligent layperson issues that really are very, very complex. The ability to avoid jargon, to write in a way that people who are interested and reasonably intelligent and well informed could follow the arguments. And in turn, and there was a fourth element, that was my ability to cross the global north, global south boundaries and understand both sides and then come to my own position. And the fact that no one could pigeonhole me that I was left or right or spoke like an northern apologist or a southern apologist. All these factors, if you think about it, are central to how the UN should operate.
Yeah.
And he came to appreciate that, and not just recognize that, appreciate that, and in turn make use of it. So I think that factor was very important. The second thing was the fact that we had autonomy with our own endowment fund, which we used to fundraise, not to just act as though the amount we had was modest, but it was enough that we could put our own money in. And trust me, that is incredibly important in raising funds when we'd say, we actually are putting our own money where our mouth is, but we need additional funds to get this going. And that was very helpful. So that was the second factor. And the third factor was the seniority at which I entered. I think what the UN system has suffered from is a lot of youthful, by definition, most recruits are young. This is their first serious job in the early to mid 20s. And they enter with a lot of enthusiasm and idealism, and they very quickly hit hard political reality. I mean, you think politics is hard and realpolitik domestically. It's nothing compared to the UN. Think of it this way. Imagine the Secretary General as a Prime Minister and Finance Minister who presents a budget to a parliament in which every single MP sits on the opposition benches. That's how difficult the job is. And so we had to operate within that, not offend too many member states, excuse me, to a degree that they become determined to frustrate you, thwart you, and defenestrate you, get rid of you. And that, again, was very useful training ground for political judgment in terms of, okay, there are things that need to be said. I'm prepared to say it. And if it comes to that, the consequence is that I end up losing my job because the SG comes to a point where he cannot defend me anymore. That's fine. So when I spoke out on the Iraq war, before, during, and after, I knew that if it came to a head, it's possible that I might lose my job.
Yeah.
But I was confident in my abilities. So even just before the war started, in fact, I did a public lecture in Canberra at the ANU, which attracted 400 people. It's the biggest audience that I've ever had in Australia. And I spoke out strongly against it, which was, as I said, unheard of. And I don't think any SG other than Kofi would have, well, I know they didn't allow it before, and certainly since then, no other one would have allowed it. So all these factors contributed to my experience. And my net conclusion to finish off this is, think of the UN as two things. It's a particular organization at a given time with its own rules and procedures, its personnel, and the key factors are the senior personnel, starting with the Secretary General. And if they understand the ideals and the limitations and operate within that, they retain a necessary element of idealism, but operate in the real world of member states, who are, after all, who control the organization. It's not the Secretariat, it's not even the SG. They control it. But he has an authority, a moral authority, that no other single person in the world has. Not the Pope, not the President of the United States, so neither the power end nor the faith end of it. The SG combines both elements. And Kofi used that, Hammarskjöld used that. No one else has managed to do that anywhere near these two people. And he did that. So they operate in that world. And because of the fact that there's only two who've done so, it gives you an idea of how limited the things has been, the idealistic side of that. But the other thing of that is, in addition to the flawed, imperfect, dysfunctional personnel and procedures and actual world, more importantly, in the long term, I think, and the key to understanding why it has a certain cachet even now, is that the United Nations represents an idea. It's a symbol. It's the only body that brings together in one organization, one house, all the divided fragments of humanity, with all our differences, with all our tensions, but also shared commitments and values. I'll go back to one incident which, again, begins to reflect our age, but it is very important. The Boxing Day tsunami. I
Yes.
happened to be flying back that day from Australia back to Tokyo. So I didn't hear the news until after I arrived in Japan. So I was there when it was breaking. But if you remember that, it was a massive humanitarian tragedy. And people responded spontaneously to try and help whichever way they could, including in Australia. It's the people's reaction that shamed the governments into generating more generously, into donating more generously to the relief efforts. And it was the four navies of India, Japan, United States, and Australia that went into immediate action. Most people don't realize that is the origin of the quadrilateral security dialogue, which is a maritime cooperation between these four countries. When the humanitarian crisis hit, these were the four countries with the most capable navies for responding to that humanitarian crisis in their region. And they did. And they discovered they could work together with great compatibility. And it was something that made them feel good. And they transformed that later on into a more regular pattern of information and exercises, which has consolidated over time. So that is the ideal that the UN represents. So it's the ideal of a world where, through shared efforts and collaboration in an international organization, want gives way to dignity, apprehensions are turned into hopes, and conflicts are replaced and displaced by peace and harmony. It's an ideal that will never be realized, but it is not an ideal that as human beings we can afford to give up on. So you've got the two sides of the United Nations, but you've also got the other factors that helped me survive that and not fall into pessimism and cynicism. And it's a question that has been thrown at me repeatedly. In Australia, when I'm speaking to young people at universities in particular, and also in India, and in India they say sir still to professors, we don't in Australia. But they say, sir, how have you remained an optimist despite working in the UN?
Mm-hmm.
So you go through that and say, well, in the end, your expectations and dreams and hopes for a better world depend upon change effected by people who are essentially optimists, believe in the possibility of progress, believe in human decency that will survive all the temptations and the flaws and imperfections and come out better on the other side. If you don't believe in that, you should not work for the UN. On the other hand, because of all the flaws and imperfections, and because most people enter when young, a lot of them get disillusioned and leave, and disproportionate number of no-hopers end up as career bureaucrats in the UN. So you've got the good side and the bad side.
So sticking to the UN for a minute, you've been very critical of the World Health Organization, describing it, if I recall correctly, as no longer fit for purpose. And of course, that was used in Australia as authority for some of the actions that the government took here during the COVID era. Can you just talk about the World Health Organization? Do you think it still serves a purpose, or it should be abolished now, or it's been overly influenced by donations, particularly Bill Gates? What do you think of it?
They all serve a purpose. You go back to why they were set up in the first place. But they have all been corrupted to the point where they're not, or pretty much most of them have been corrupted to the point where they're no longer fit for purpose. But that's not a bug, that's a feature of bureaucracy inherently, whether national or international. If an organization as a bureaucracy, as a department, has been around for 7 to 8 decades, the chances are very high that the original mission has been displaced, and the primary purpose is to grow the bureaucracy with the proliferation of mandates, with demands for increasing resources, with demands for increasing personnel in numbers and greater authority, with demands to try and convert desirable aspirational goals into legally binding commitments, which then, if they are not met, need to be criminalized and deplatformed and censored and suppressed, suppression of dissenting opinions. We've seen that with climate change. We saw it with COVID. We've seen it with the pandemic accords, which I'll be dealing with in the second edition of the book because the accords had not been signed at the time. And we see it with any bureaucracy. The survival, expansion, and growth of the bureaucracy becomes more important. That is what the chief executive tries to do. Anyone who doesn't subscribe to that is let go, either encouraged to resign or fired. In national bureaucracies, there is a built-in check on that, in that they are subject to political authorities above and over them. There is no equivalent to a minister in charge of a department who tells the department and orders the secretary, the chief CEO of the department, or else fires them. And we know that in Australia, the government can fire any secretary, departmental secretary. So the opportunity for them to subvert the original mission of the organization for what it was set up. Think of it this way. You set up a bureau, including the WHO, to solve a particular problem, in this case, a health-related problem. Now, either the organization over 8 decades has succeeded, in which case it is redundant and should be let go, or it has failed, in which case it should be reformed and or replaced. Now, I haven't told you this yet, John, but I'm actually co-chair of an international group called the International Health Reform Panel or project, which is looking at the question. And I've been writing, we are going to publish within the next couple of months, actually published, so we are just about finished the work, 2 complementary reports, a policy report addressing the policy audience and the general audience, and a technical report that will contain the solid academic and intellectual weight, and that gives gravitas to the first one. And my one-liner summary of the options we are laying out is reform, replace, or perish. You've got to reform, and by that we mean surgical reform, major reform that goes back to the original mission and finds structures and work procedures that allow it to do that. Or replace it, keep the good parts, the proven good parts in terms of mission, mandates, methods, etc. And then add on and improve upon the bad parts. And the reason we might end up with that is what happened with the transition from the League of Nations after the First World War to the United Nations after the Second. Anyone who looks at the 2 organizations, starting with the relative respective constitutions, the Covenant in the case of the League and the Charter in the UN, realizes very quickly that in essence, the United Nations is a reformed League of Nations. But for political reasons, it would have been much more difficult to try to reform the League and get countries to commit to it. It was easier to do a bigger job than to focus on minor job of tinkering with the existing thing with ad hoc improvements. And that is a point at which comes with every organization. There is a point at which the effort in trying to reform it far exceeds the value of any achievement you get at the other end. And it is easier to start afresh. So it may be that that's what we decide with the WHO. And that means essentially we are looking at a commitment in principle to the idea, just like I was saying about the UN, a commitment in principle to the idea of an international health organization, which works on the principle of what the Europeans call subsidiarity. You tackle the problems at the lowest possible level, where it has maximum need but also maximum impact, and only move upwards in the different layers to tackle things that can only be done at the top level. So the argument then becomes you don't do at the international level things that can be done better at the international level, but you only do things at the international level that cannot be done, even if not so well, at the lower level. Because long term, it is better for people to do it at the lowest level possible, because then they internalize the experience and learn from it. So that's the idea that we are going to try and push. And if you fail either to reform or to replace, then accept the very real risk that you'll fall apart, you'll perish, that you cannot survive as is. So that's the message. Sorry, go on.
So Australia signed up to the pandemic treaty for the WHO, which you were very critical of. Can you just explain? I think most Australians wouldn't be aware that we even signed up to this treaty, which grants enormous power to the WHO to declare pandemics and basically take over the health response in various signatory countries. Could you just give us your response to that? Why did Australia sign up for it?
It takes us into a much bigger question, and that, in a sense, plays to my strength, the answer. And that is, I've approached the whole topic, as you know, even on COVID, from the start, explicitly as a policy analyst. I am not and have never claimed to be a medical researcher, a medic in any form, or even a scientist. But I look at policy whose primary job and mission is not to find solutions. Because at a policy level, you're not looking for solutions, you're looking for trade-offs. How do you, on a hierarchy, organize problems that are most urgent, that can be tackled? At what cost? And so how much resources do you allocate to the different policy baskets that require being addressed as a government? And for that, you need experts, but experts from a range of perspectives and the different policy domains that you're addressing as a government. But the experts come to the table at your request as policymaker. They offer advice, leave the final decision to you, the trade-offs that require political judgment, and then try faithfully to implement your decisions as bureaucrats. In health, and increasingly in many other areas, again, climate change is a good example. What we have seen is experts replace political decision makers. We have seen the rise of the administrative state. We have seen the equivalent in international bureaucracies, hence the proliferation of international technocrats and multiplication of the mandates and more money to them. And to go back to what I was saying earlier about the failure and success, what is remarkable over the 80 years is now the model is, if we have failed, it's because you didn't give us enough resources. We warned you in time. Now will you listen to us? We need more money. We need more mandates. We need to make it criminal if you don't listen to what we are saying. Suppress the dissent. If we succeed, then you say, well, isn't it a crazy time to end us? We're actually doing what you want us to do, being successful. So regardless of whether the actual record is failure or success, the answer is the same. More money, more resources, more power. And silencing our opponents and critics. Mm-hmm. That is the expert class. And that expert class, what I've recently been copying someone from the UK, I've been calling the lanyard class. Process obsessed, rules obsessed, wearing their lanyard tags around them. That lanyard class has taken over from governments. You mentioned the public may not be aware of it. How many of 150 odd MPs do you think would be able to tell you what the pandemic agreement is all about? In our system,
zero.
In Parliament,
Zero to one.
The executive doesn't even have to take that issue to Parliament. They sign off as an executive, even as a treaty. Whereas in the US system, the treaty does require ratification by the parliamentary system, by Senate, not in ours.
Wow.
So there is that. And you saw during COVID, the bureaucrats took over. And then the bureaucrats were promoted to governors and this and that and that. And it was in South Australia and WA that the police commissioner was making the decisions in the end. Not because they launched a coup, the government's handed over. So I think that has been the rise of the experts at the expense of the political leaders has created a huge democratic legitimacy deficit, pretty much in all democratic countries, and not just the Western ones. Internationally, the experts rule. I think that is what the populist surge is against. What does populist mean? It's used pejoratively as a term of abuse and delegitimization. It means policies that are popular with more voters than are not. So the fact that something that should, on the face of it,
it's a fake
democratic legitimacy has been turned around into authoritarianism, far right, fascist, Nazi, neo-Nazi, etc., etc., etc. And I think that
like you're reading out my CV there.
The anti-globalization across the board, including on the health issue, is a reflection of that. And the fact that you failed us so badly on COVID has helped to open a lot more people's eyes to what's going on and how the experts may be the most credentialed. It doesn't mean they are the brightest and the most intelligent and the most commonsensical. And you saw it in The Voice in Australia as well. How the elites across the board, across every domain, across every sector, united. The Qantas with its messaging, the cultural elites, the financial elites, the ruling government elite, the bureaucrats, the media, the message was just unrelenting. And same, universities. It was all one-sided. And come the vote, what is it? 60-40. The elites are completely disconnected from their own people. The metropolitan centers do not even know what the rest of the country is thinking, let alone understand, or God forbid, agree with them. And that is not isolated. You see that, and you see the efforts to criminalize their participation in the political process in country after country. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't feel confident that should he actually win, or even that Nigel Farage will be allowed to compete, just as they've done with Marine Le Pen in France, and they're trying to do with AfD in Germany. Giorgia Meloni was lucky in Italy that she got through and has been a great success as a PM. But see the difficulties that some of the others have had, and the EU has stepped in to cancel elections. Well, in the UK, there's just about to cancel local elections again by deferring them in May. So the democratic project is under serious threat, but it's under serious threat from this side of politics, and also from the other side to a lesser extent. But this is the problem. The experts believe not only that they know better, but that they have the right to impose their preferences and policies on the rest of us. And they have taken that to the international level. And Starmer is trying to shuffle back into the EU despite the clear Brexit verdicts. And that is the difficulty. So I think the answer to your question is people don't know. They trust the experts. I think the lesson of COVID is it's bad policy to trust the experts. And the lesson in some countries on this since then is it may also be bad politics, because in fact, people are starting to wake up and sympathize with and subscribe to. And the mass immigration is another one. How do you explain the dramatic upsurge in poll support in opinion polls for one nation? It's the same phenomenon. So yes, it is true. And I think what this shows is that there is more scope than many of us were prepared to accept for reversing this within the existing political channels and processes. But it requires clarity of thought, and it requires courage to act on that. And the the thing I was talking about with WHO and UN in general, the bureaucracy in general, the choice is, do you reform or do you replace? In many ways, voters are coming to the same conclusion with regard to their traditional alignment with parties. They're saying, we've tried to reform my party from within. I have stayed faithful to the ideology on which the party was founded. They have walked away from that. Therefore, I will now look for alternatives. And so political alignment that traditionally used to go from parent to children to grandchildren, that has begun to fragment and recoalesce across the Western world. It's a much weaker intergenerational party loyalty than used to be the case. And I think that's a good thing, because it will force parties no longer to take voters for granted. It is no longer true that they have nowhere else to go. They do, and they are doing so.
Can I ask
It
you
was
just
remarkable.
sorry, John, can I just have I just want to break it down to really simple, fundamental stuff. In your opinion, I know the elite don't want us to have free speech. They don't think we're responsible enough to have it, or maybe, I don't know, that's the feeling. But in your opinion, what is the importance of free speech in a country?
It's central. Without free speech, you cannot have free society. Without free society, you cannot have meaningful and sustained progress. You go back to the Enlightenment. What explains the rise of prosperity, freedom, liberty, democratization of equality of opportunity, if you like, in the Western countries, is the combination of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution in Europe, which has been immensely beneficial to the whole world, not just to Westerners. We have never been better educated. We have never had more knowledge. We have never been as prosperous in terms of realistic middle-class aspirations. We have never been as healthy. The danger is the belief that progress is always linear and only goes in one direction. We know in history that cultures and knowledge can be lost. Freedoms and progress can be reversed. You can slip back into authoritarianism. The biggest threats to civilizational erasure, as Trump's national security strategy put it, come from within. Complacency, hard work is done, you take things for granted, you don't resist at a time when your resistance can be successful. It becomes much harder then to fight your way out of that. I think we are at that. I mean, certainly, I hope we can avoid complete breakdowns of societies. But, which Western country, seriously, is as cohesive today as it was, let's say, one generation, 3 decades ago?
Mm.
Just start with that question. And it's a very sobering point of entry for an analysis of where we are today.
Yeah.
We have more divisions, we have more tensions, all at the time that there seems to be a rise in a belief in inclusiveness and social tolerance, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, what you said before about the elite being out of touch, that seems to be our Prime Minister who's pushing these hate speech laws. And I'm living on the road going town meeting people. The people are enraged by them. I believe that he's actually...
and they've succeeded in getting him to withdraw it. Now, he lacked support on the crossbenchers in the Senate for different reasons, but doesn't matter. He has shown himself singularly out of touch. I think he's also out of his depth. I think his reaction to the Bondi massacre showed that he is running out of time. And I think from the popular reaction, the people have run out of patience with him. So yes, there are problems. I think, his authority eroded after the voice referendum. I think his authority has crumbled with his, what was the phrase that Henry Ergus used in The Australian? He had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, to agree to a royal commission.
Yeah.
You see that in the choice of the commissioner and in the terms of reference, and then in this bill. If you look at the complexity and size of the bill, clearly this was a solution ready to hand, waiting for a crisis that would be exploited.
Yes, correct.
And once again, too many people saw through it.
Yes.
So he has never outgrown his student activism. He remains much more skilled at fighting internal factional battles within the party, and his favorite pastime, fighting the Tories. He has been anything but a unifying national leader, able to rise above the fray. I go back to Kofi Annan. Of all the people I have known in my lifetime, and I've been privileged enough to get to know quite a few senior people in leadership positions in many different countries in the world and internationally. Of all the people I've known, he was the one who I think best illustrated, exemplified what I think of as a good leader. Someone who combines the inspirational and the aspirational while being still well-grounded in political reality. Someone who has the ability to communicate where he or she would like to take us, why that vision is important, why it matters, and why it is more important to aim for that vision and work for it than to be stuck in our immediate self-interest. In other words, transcend your immediate self-interest because the larger cause is more important. So he sets out the aspirational goal and inspires us, coaxes us to work for that better vision instead of accepting where we are, and shows us a way. All the great leaders in history have satisfied this.
To strive to be greater than what we can be, what we think we can be.
Why it is important, how we think we can get there with the right of, whether you're looking at Martin Luther King Jr., or even Jesus Christ, or Gautam Buddha, or international leaders, or the great national leaders. They managed to do that. That is what the system they tried to put in place after the Second World War was the vision and the achievements of the great wartime leaders in the different countries. That is what we are lacking. I think since then, we have pretty much everywhere in democratic countries descended into career politicians. Think of the breadth of experience, again, going back, let's say after this end of the Second World War, in the first couple of decades, for example, or even 3 decades in Australia, the cabinets reflected a breadth of experience in the real world. Now, it is essentially career politicians. What job has the Prime Minister had out in the real world? Which of his cabinet ministers have had any real job? I mean, I've been an academic and then a UN official for all my life. But even I feel that I have a better grasp of what the real world is than any of these clowns. And that's not just the Labour side, it's true on the other side as well. What is your aspiration? Student politics, then become a staffer, wait for the right vacancy, put your hand up, get pre-selected, and then you're in Parliament, and then you become Cabinet Minister, and if you're lucky, Prime Minister. Well, it shows. How many of them have ever had to balance a budget? I mean, I've had to do that in the organizations that I've run or been responsible for, or the departments I've had, or the center I used to run at the ANU before I retired. You have to identify where you're going to get your money, how you're going to satisfy the people who give you the money without compromising your integrity in terms of the position you hold and the organization you represent. Do those calculations. For them, we need more money. We can commit another billion or 2 or 40 billion. It's taxpayer money. Well, as Mrs. Thatcher said famously, socialists keep going until they run out of other people's money.
I don't think anyone thinks that Albanese could run the corner store. And every small business person
he would run
in the
it.
country.
He would run it into deficit and bankruptcy.
Yeah, straight away.
His idea of running.
That'd be an interesting
imagine.
play, wouldn't it? To actually take someone like Albanese, he's totally disgraced, thrown out of society. Like I was in a town, a South Australian town the other day, and a bakery. Now, most of the town has been bought by new migrants. And the rumor is that they're buying it with a $40,000 grant that they all get when they enter the country. We contacted the immigration minister to ask him, can you confirm or deny that? He hasn't replied. That was from John's suggestion. But they believe it all over Australia. But in this one bakery, there's this woman, Australian woman. She was like in her early 80s. Her face looked like, well, it was just so lined. It was like history in her face, except you couldn't read it. And she's learning how to work there because she can no longer afford to live just on the pension. So she's going back to work in her 80s. And I thought this is a symbol of where we are as Australia. We're sitting on all this mineral wealth. We should be abundantly wealthy. And here is someone who's basically closer to a nursing home than the womb, going back to work like an apprentice with a little hat on and a little badge, you know, and here she is trying to, you know, this is how it is on the ground, if you know what I mean.
I'd like to just modify one thing I said. I think the Prime Minister perhaps does have a bit more self-awareness than I gave him credit for, in that conspicuously, he did not turn up at the Sydney Cricket Ground for the final test. And let's see if he turns up at the Australian Open in the final. I'd be very interested whether he will risk appearing in public and risk the boos that will ring out. I don't think he takes very well to public criticism like that.
Well, Bikini Gate has really floored him. You know.
Yeah.
Sorry,
but
do you
if
have
he
any?
does turn up and if he is booed, that makes wonderful election material for the opposition parties, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. But that Bondi Beach thing was incredible. But I just want to ask, previous to COVID, I think Australia was quite naive. Where you said they're becoming more aware, it seems to me that what happened in COVID and the jabs and everything was like a Pearl Harbor attack on our culture. Mandates. I was reading about you saying authoritarian. This is a picture I took. Oh, you can't see it. Where is it? See where? It's a picture of an armored car on the streets of Melbourne. There. These guys, where two of them, I got shot by them. They were shooting grandmothers with rubber bullets. People holding freedom signs. This was pre the shrine, and Australia had never seen it. So, like here, that's the shrine. Here's the new police, all in their armor, and here's Australians. So it's like these guys are off to the cricket or bingo, and these are saying, "No, we're the future now. Do what we tell you, or we'll brutalize your grandmothers." Like here, I'm the only person I know I'm the only person who's talked to that woman. So she was Croatian. Her name was Mary, and I asked her. I said, "Did the reason you didn't run away when the police were coming towards you?" And she was wearing the Australian flag as a cape. Is that because you took it for granted? Then in Australia, the Victoria Police wouldn't hurt an old woman. And she said, that's exactly what I thought. And then this guy in front pushed her down and pepper sprayed her. The guy behind her, the bigger guy, pepper sprayed her. 7 other cops walked past her and ignored her as she was screaming and struggling. And then the 8th cop stopped and he tended to her and called others to tend. He renewed her faith in humanity that day. And but I thought that day, everything would stop. I thought Australians would go, that's it. No, we're pushing over grandmothers, pepper spraying. This is it. This is Schindler's List stuff. We're not going anywhere forward. Instead, the authorities claimed that it was a man dressed up, which was bullshit because I met her there. And the public bought it. And I thought, why would the public buy a lie? Is that because they're so scared of the government that basically they're doing anything the government says? Anyway, the question is, COVID-19 was a Pearl Harbor attack. No enemy gets 2 Pearl Harbors. Is this what the voice is now? And hate speech laws, Australians are like, all their defenses up. Anything coming from the government now, you have to be completely skeptical about.
I think that's a very important element. Before COVID, it never occurred to me to doubt any recommendation from the health department, either in Australia at the national level or from the WHO at the international level. So faithfully and dutifully, I took all the recommended vaccines whenever I traveled or whenever it was time for that, including boosters. And said, I did not, it was beyond my comprehension that they could be lying or gaslighting us or dissembling, or that they didn't have our best interests at heart. So I took all that for granted. And when all the descent into authoritarian practices began in Australia, my reaction was, before this, I would have sworn and bet a year's salary that we would never see these scenes in Australia in my lifetime. And what happens after that, I don't know. But there's no way that this would be done. And then I brought all that together, and I think I sent my op-ed to the Japan Times on what was happening in Australia by way of this descent into authoritarianism. And the opinion editor and the editor, as a rare step, came back to me and said, is this all true? Are you not exaggerating? This is Australia we are talking about. Mm. So I sent them reams of links to newspaper articles and to video footage, including the ones some of the ones you just had up, saying, well, this is the point. It is happening, and people need to be made aware of it. And then you remember the interviews from American TV and people saying, is this really happening? Do we really have military on the streets of Sydney and police helicopters on your beaches? What's going on? And then the article was published after that. Now, the Japan Times doesn't actually, in the op-eds, much like the Australian, doesn't include hyperlinks. So they wanted to get all that before they published it, because it is a serious article. But when it was published, I had the same reaction from a lot of readers saying, isn't this article over the top? Surely this is exaggeration. Yeah. So people who wrote like that, I wrote back and with the same links. And they said, wow. So yes, it was there. And I think it was the critical thing that broke, forget about government. In the States, from the start of the COVID thing, not until the end, but maybe 23 or 24, the opinion polls, trust in the medical profession fell, I'm relying on my memory now, fell from 71.5% to 40.1%. In a short space of time, it's nearly half what it was, and it's trading water. Well, it's going it's underwater now at under 50%. And that was due to COVID. Mm. And you have had the same in Australia. Mm. It shows up in your vaccine take-up now. What is it? 3% of eligible Australians have taken up the booster offer. Mm. Last I looked, it was something like that. Just 3%. And, it's got to the point. The Met Office is another favorite hobby horse, isn't it? The Met Office says it's raining. I look out the window and say, is it actually raining? Or is it that's made up? So that trust is gone. And essentially, if you like, let's go back to the voice. Essentially, that was a primary line that the government was running. Yeah. Trust us. And the response was no.
Yeah.
That trend has left us.
I do think with the voice, I do feel that once the people, because I was trying to vote, we live in the bus, we had to go 300 kilometers that day to find a place where we were allowed to vote because we were out of our state. I think it was Mackay when we finally reached somewhere. And everything was yes, yes, yes. It was just one tiny little stand out of the way with the no vote. And you walked in there thinking, we don't stand a chance. This is going through. But I wondered when it was crushed, whether ordinary Australians got into the booth, there was no camera in their face, no one actually telling them, threatening them with their jobs or losing family and friends or their house. They were alone and they basically did an FU to the government. I don't care how good this is. I'm just saying no. This is my personal revolution.
I think, Michael, That is true, but only half true, and let me explain why. And by way of background, before the actual vote, right up the last moment, my wife was quite apprehensive that the yes would pass. So we had that discussion, and I said, look, it's not just one opinion poll, but pretty much all the opinion polls are agreed. And all of them, the poll of polls, if you like, that the Real Clear Politics site does, the poll of polls suggested a 60-40 split. And I said, much as I'm a cynic, as a student of politics, it is absolutely inconceivable to me that all the polls could be this wrong. So it may not be 60-40, but I'd be staggered if it was any worse than 55-45, a comfortable margin. Where we didn't get what the polls had shown was a rejection in every single state. The only places where it was positive was ACT, but of course the ACT has a separate, it's not being a state, doesn't count as a separate thing. So I think that it was picked up in the polls. But the fact that you went in still thinking like that reflected the reluctance of the media to give prominence to just where the people were and to insist that it was close, that it was still going to be there. I also think, again, going back to the Prime Minister's failure, his argument of trust me, and then his confession that he's only read the top page. And when asked, well, why haven't you read the whole document? It's not an extensive document. I remember his answer, why would I? I mean, this is a Prime Minister of a country trying to force through a constitutional change, not just law. And he couldn't be bothered to read the 15, 16, 18-page document, whatever it was, before he goes forward. Why, in that case, my response was, well, why would I trust you then? This is as close to an open admission of prime ministerial negligence as I have come across in any country.
Wow.
You're proposing a serious constitutional change, which it will not be possible to reverse ever, given the difficulties of amending the constitution in this country. And all you do is read a 500-word summary, first page. It wasn't even 500, I forget how many words, it was 300 or something. So I think he lost a lot of credibility from that answer. But just that dismissive attitude towards legitimate questions and grievances and refusal to negotiate in good faith, consult, he's got into the habit, and he did it again with this bill that's now been withdrawn, where he demands unity and consensus without having reached out and engaged in good faith discussions to see if we can find a common place. Now, that's something that you learn very quickly as a UN bureaucrat, that you have to find common ground. You can't impose your will. You have no power. And to do that, you have to go and talk to various people and see if you can find a formula that allows all sides to satisfy the bottom lines without any one party being able to get all its claims through. And then it's a matter for them to decide, is this enough now? They haven't operated like that. I think they've been misled by the size of the parliamentary majority, which has allowed them to overlook the reality of the very, very low primary vote. I think it is the case that in the last election, the two major parties combined had the lowest combined primary vote ever in our history, or close to it. And by all accounts, it might be even lower next time. So Keir Starmer has done the same in the UK. People forget, and he ignores the fact that the size of his vote was actually lower than what Jeremy Corbyn managed. And Corbyn is supposed to have been a disaster as a politician. So this huge parliamentary majority does not at all reflect or mean an actual electoral mandate to do things, But he's been operating as if it means he has a mandate, not just the numbers. Well, he doesn't. And I said, I think the fragmentation of the political parties inside parliaments reflects the fragmentation of society outside.
Maybe we could go back to this very
You think?
many years, and we're going to produce an Australian. This came out in 2023. So how was it, Ramesh, that you were one of the only academics in Australia to come out skeptical or critical of the government crackdowns, of the rapid rollouts of vaccinations and the lockdowns and so on? How was it that, you know, you could look at the Conversation, that academic journal or online academic journal, and you were virtually the only one. I was looking around as an old journalist. I was deliberately looking around for someone that disagreed with the government response. And it was basically impossible to find. You couldn't find it in any of the major newspapers or online, anywhere. And then I found you in a rather obscure, to most people anyway, an obscure policy wonk magazine called Pearls and Irritations. And there you were with the full statistical suite and very well argued critique of what the government was up to. But how come you were one of the only ones to stand up like that? I mean, is it sort of like a function of funding, like for academics? You know, one headline I remember was what to tell your 5-year-old before the jab, and all this sort of thing. So there was an army of academics that were backing up the government. And the media, of course, which I spent my lifetime in, they were just unbelievable. You couldn't find a single dissenting voice. And even on Facebook and that, when I would say, well, you know, some of the smartest people on the planet disagree, and they would be, you know, it's like a pack mentality. So how was it that you were one of the few? Is it a function of funding or what?
Well, let me give you a multi-part answer, which will definitely then be a long one. And maybe we can focus on that part for now. And as you foreshadowed, we're going to be doing an Australian edition that will update that with articles that were published since then, which we can talk about after that book is published, and we can go into more detail on the subject then. Because the first part is actually more interesting and also more important. How and why did I get into this to start with? How did I get away with it? And why did I stay with it for a long time? Let me put it in those three terms. So how did I get into it? I mean, as academics, your professional life is solving theoretical puzzles. Some are normally between different theories or between theory and facts. And you think, well, how do I explain that? What is it that people have missed? What is new about it? Have the facts changed? Are theories out of date? Are rival theories better now? It goes in that, and then there's a whole complex intellectual infrastructure behind that in terms of how science operates and how science advances. And secondly, as I said, I've approached things from a policy point of view, but essentially as a sort of equivalent to the chief political scientist for the UN, and bringing academics together to present state-of-the-art knowledge and apply that to the policy challenges confronting us as UN, which is the recommendations and advice we then give to member states. My breadth of interest was much wider than my own narrow academic focus. I used to co-convene and co-chair a meeting in Geneva every year at the specific request of the Secretary General Kofi Annan, which brought together the research parts of the UN system with their counterparts on the operational side. So which are the parts that are studying peacekeeping, and bring together people from the Department of Peacekeeping Operations for that? Which are the parts that are studying conflict, development, health issues, and bring them together with counterparts in the different units in the UN system? So the practitioners, within the limited UN context, the practitioners, but that's certainly the policy wonks and the researchers, bring them together. And it was a very interesting exercise because those debates were exactly what you find in the rest of the world outside the UN. The gap between academics and practitioners. The academics claiming that practitioners want immediate answers, they don't do this, they don't do that, etc. And the practitioners complaining about the ivory towers of the academics and the impossibility of getting clear answers, the impossibility of getting clear recommendations, the difficulty of getting, answers without, on the one hand, on the other hand, sort of thing. That's the thing. So it was there. But part of that included then health issues. So I was familiar with that there. Then we established a new institute, like the equivalent of a new faculty, under the UN University in Kuala Lumpur, as it happens, the Institute of Global Health. And I was involved in the discussions and negotiations with the government of Malaysia on that. So as part of that, I read up on the pressing global health challenges and the existing institutions and systems within the UN, and discussed and consulted with the WHO, obviously, because we're not going to do something that either duplicated or ran counter to their existing things. And we worked something out in consultancy with them. So that was the second thing. Third thing, I began collaboration with the UN University with a small outfit in Canada, which was led by the former Prime Minister Paul Martin, who had been finance minister when the Asian financial crisis struck. And he had been instrumental in setting up the finance ministers G20 when it was first set up after the Asian crisis. And when he became Prime Minister, it occurred to him that it makes sense to think of elevating the finance ministers G20 into a global level leaders G20 to get together and replicate that experience of knowing each other and trusting each other and making decisions and then telling the bureaucrats what to do. So once he lost the prime ministership after losing an election, he began a small group of experts talking over whether it was worth moving from finance to leaders level G20, how it could be achieved, what topics could be addressed, etc. And I was collaborating from the UN University with that, including part funding for that. And when I left the UN University, I ended up actually joining that organization in Canada and working with them on that effort. And as part of that, we ran a series of simulation exercises, if you like, and we identified a number of international crises that could be the trigger to elevating the finance ministers into global leaders level. Terrorism, nuclear, financial crisis, and health was one of those. So we already were looking at that. In other words, there's different ways in which I was familiar with the health crisis and how we move that to collaboration that is worthwhile and feasible. Second, I was retired. I didn't, they couldn't fire me. I was already retired. My job was not at stake. Because of my background in the ways I outlined, I was familiar with the WHO position and the existing pandemic preparedness plans. And then the policies they started implementing contradicted all the main elements of that plan. And the last iteration of that was published in a little booklet by the WHO as recently as September 2019. So just a few months before, in March, they declare a global pandemic in COVID. We've got this updated thing which synthesizes a century's worth of knowledge and experience, starting from the Spanish flu, of how to handle pandemics and what not to do. And suddenly, we are embracing everything that the WHO had been saying we shouldn't do.
Wow.
Like, all sorts of things. Masks is one example. It's very clear that in community settings, they serve no purpose. In healthcare settings, they might have some limited utility, but it goes on like that. So I went back and looked at that document again And then I followed up and looked at some national pandemic preparedness plans, including our one, including the British ones is another I looked at, and some states in the US I think I looked at, or maybe it was Canada. And they all agreed that these were not done. And then you think back, you sit back and you think, well, of course, if facts change or if science advances, then you can change the thing. But this is September 2019. In March, we are doing this and we are introducing these plans. There hasn't been enough time to get new facts that contradict what we agreed on. There hasn't been time to engage in authentic scientific research and come to different scientific conclusions. So on what basis are they doing that? So that's when I began to look at that. And essentially, my conclusion was they're panicking. And it's a herd panic response. At that time, certainly, I didn't think of anything more nefarious than that. And third, because of my background, I had access to a lot of responsible top-level mainstream media outlets. And I began writing for them. So I had articles in the first year, not just in Pearls and Irritations as an obscure policy online journal, but also in the Australian, in the Japan Times, in the Times of India. These are your major outlets in important countries. And I think if you go back in time, the window for critical discussion closed towards the end of 2020. Around mid-2020, it was still possible to publish dissenting opinions. And I was able to do that subsequently later on as well, but that was slightly more pragmatic. So initially, these things came out. And I published those and said, it doesn't make sense to me. Again, I made it very clear that I had no medical knowledge and I'm not giving medical advice. But I don't understand why this is being done. And if they have good reason to do it, then they should do a better job of communicating and explaining that to the public. I was struck by the fact that a lot of top-level health chiefs who had recently retired from various countries took a similar position in saying, we don't understand why they're doing this. It contradicts everything we've been taught. And then, of course, famously, we had Sweden, where their chief epidemiologist, Angus Tegnell, said exactly the same thing, that he looked at what the Europeans were doing. He went back and looked at the existing knowledge. He could find no scientific historical justification for what they were doing. So as far as he was concerned, he was going to stay with the existing science. And he said in that first year, don't judge us now or even in 1 year. Judge us by results in either 1 year or maybe after 2 years. In this case, the opposite of famous last words. They really were famous last words because they've been vindicated. So I looked at all that, and that's the line I took. And then towards the end of 2020, I essentially actually said that I'm not going to write on this anymore. This is not what I retired for. This is not really my area. I'm going to stop. And that's part of why I stayed with it. I had two sets of reactions, which made me change my mind. One was a lot of quote unquote ordinary folks wrote to me. My email address is publicly available even now at the ANU. Wrote to me and said, no, please keep writing. You have street cred. You have respectability. You write in a way that we can understand. You write using, as far as you can, primary documents and research. And it is important that that our voices are reflected through your writings. And it provides us with some essentially solace and comfort to see that. But I also had a lot of health practitioners contact me and say, please, do keep writing. You have an uncanny knack and ability to understand the issues at play and to explain them to a public audience better than many doctors can do. And what we can do is provide you information. We are not in a position where we can speak out. It costs us our jobs. But we value what you are writing, and we are prepared to comment on things before you publish, if you like, and give you information to the extent we can. But we would like you to keep writing. So in a sense, they turned it into a responsibility on my part because I had this access and I had this presence and visibility, however limited. that at least someone somewhere was saying these things that needed to be said. So then I kept going, and as things became more critical, one example on vaccines I'll give you. The Australian, I think it was, when I sent something and the opinion editor took me up and said, well, you've said this about you remember the weekly surveillance report that the Department of Health used to put out, both the federally and then the New South Wales? I think this was the New South Wales ones where I had said how they are claiming that the unvaccinated continue to be disproportionately represented in the numbers hospitalized, in ICU, and dead. And I took that out report from the week. They're claiming this on page 2, and page 14 or 16, they actually had the tables. And the numbers of unvaccinated in hospital in that week was 0, ICU was 0, dead 0. So I said, it is mathematically impossible to be overrepresented if your raw figure is 0. And do the bureaucrats and the ministers not even read what they're publishing their name? And she said, you gave me the URL. I've got the document in front of me on my screen. I don't find that table you're referring to. So I took her through that. And she did half a dozen or so checks on those critical points with me. And I was actually very pleased that they were careful enough to do that. But once they were assured that I had my facts exactly right, and that I was not misrepresenting or misleading what the document said, then after that, they took me on trust for subsequent things when I sent things in for their sake with the URL included, which they didn't include in the published version. But the fact that I was using primary documents, as I said, and not misleading, not taking things out of context, that gave me credibility with them, and it gave them confidence to be able to publish that, confident that they would be able to withstand any attacks on them by saying, well, we checked it out and this is what it says. And if it's wrong, then you need to go back and correct your own sources, sort of thing. So that helped me stay with these things as well, plus the international credibility. And I should add, because this is a major issue that came up repeatedly, I was never, not once, queried, let alone rebuked by my university.
Wow.
All they said is, as long as it is clear that you're emeritus professor, you're not speaking for the university.
Mm.
It's in your head. If you make a mistake, that'll be your problem. The other side of that then was, I had to be extremely careful in everything I wrote, that at least all my factual claims I could back up with appropriate documents or articles. And opinions, you can always say, well, that's my opinion. But yeah, I could say, if I'm wrong, it's because this published thing is wrong. I will correct it when the correction comes. But all I'm doing is taking what the experts are saying and putting it in a framework in terms of policy trade-offs. And for example, you say, well, even one avoidable death is one too many. And I say, well, from policy point of view, this is as stupid and moronic as you can get. I mean, if you know, for example, that around the world, more than 1 million people die on road accidents, in road accidents. By definition, then, you could save at least 1 million lives annually around the world by banning automobiles altogether. But this is so far-fetched an idea that no country even contemplates that, although some might be moving towards that now in terms of petrol cars. But the costs, economic, social, even in terms of lives, they're just too horrendous to think of that. So you keep it within acceptable thresholds and try and decrease that over time. And that's the policy trade-off we should have faced with COVID. It made no sense to turn your National Health Service into a national COVID-only service. And now the after effects are flowing through. The deferred screenings, the interrupted immunization schedules because of the COVID restrictions, the declining faith in vaccines after that, the drop in confidence. I think the UNICEF published was it last year or a year before, 67 million children around the world lost out on at least one necessary immunization dose because of the combined effect of disruptions to services and falling trust in humanization. So all this is there, and allowed me, impelled me, obligated me, whatever word you want to use, stay with it. But mostly for the past while I have done with that. I think this health reform project I'm talking about might well be my last major contribution to this debate, and then it's up to others.
So can I clarify that well before this the COVID panic, lockdowns were seen as inappropriate response to a pandemic, and that governments around the world basically contradicted this long established practice. And
yes,
and Mike's been all around the country interviewing people whose lives have been severely damaged, businesses lost, mental health, etc. But many people lost their businesses, and therefore their employees lost their jobs. But that's correct, yes? That the government contradicted.
It was inappropriate. It was unethical. There was no utility to it in terms of positive side. There's lots of disutility to it in terms of harmful collateral consequences. Lockdowns is a euphemism. What they're doing was putting us all on the house arrest.
Yes.
Even if we had committed no crime, even if we were healthy. It was, with vaccines, you went one further. The explanation for the failure of vaccines was people who didn't take it. Now, as far as I know, this is the first time in history that explanations for the failure of a drug is pointing the finger at those who refuse to take the drug. So, it's...
So you shouldn't laugh.
Not
but
a bad
it's
analogy when you think of if you went into a bank in the old days wearing a mask, the first thing they do is call the cops. And during COVID, if you went into a bank wearing a mask, the first thing they'll do is call the cops.
Yeah.
So it's a peculiar inversion of reality. So yes, lockdowns were never recommended. It was recognized that the benefits were illusory, if any. The harms were serious and substantial and enduring. And so it made no sense. School closures. School closures, I think, in the long term, are probably even more damaging to children's future than vaccines.
Yeah.
I think compulsory masking might turn out to be long-term more damaging to children's future and development than vaccines. Because they just lost out in the first few years of this necessary human interaction.
I had, can I tell you something beautiful about that, Ramesh? I was approached, because I was prominent in the Melbourne campaigns against Dan Andrews and the pandemic bill. Dan Andrews banned unvaccinated children from going to the Christmas carols. And so an underground Christian resistance group approached me and said, would you and Damien Richardson MC, we're going to have, in a park, we're going to have Christmas carols for everyone. That's what we did. And a lot of people turned up. But we were very concerned of the police coming. We're always waiting to have the police come in. We had a choir and they got a call. We were told it was from the Archbishop or someone to do with the Archbishop, and told them they'd be in real trouble if they sung to these children. So they left. So suddenly we had 10 minutes to go. We had no choir. And I said to the people watching, I said, look, our choir has been scared off. Anybody here sing? And the choir emerged from the crowd of people who came up and prepared to sing. It was a beautiful, beautiful night. But at the end, we had a thing called the Free Hug Army, where we offered, because the government had a thing saying, staying apart keeps us together. So we retaliated by having the Free Hug Army. We offered hugs to everyone. And Damien and I were hugging people at the front of the stage. And then we looked down, and there was all these children, about 4, 5 years old, 3, 4, 5 years old, looking up at us. And we realized they'd never seen humans hugging, strangers hugging. And so I got down and I said to them, I said, would you like a hug? And for the next few minutes, all these children lifted up their hands around us, and we hugged all of them. This is mature white males who aren't supposed to touch kids. You got that, we're the bad ones. But it was absolutely one of the most extraordinary, beautiful moments of my life.
Well,
Because
we
these
had a
kids
couple of those.
really grabbed on.
We had a couple of those, Michael,
Mm.
where we went into a store, whether it's a cold store, supermarket, or whether it's Bunnings, warehouse, or wherever, something like that. And most of the other people are masked, and I wasn't, or maybe if my wife was with me, or she was by herself, she wasn't. I mean, if you would put it on, we would have one in our back pockets, and if the entrance to the store said you have to have a mask on, we would then put it on, but not everyone did. And a baby in a carry-on, you know, in the mother's chest, would spot a human being with a complete face that's not masked, and the beautiful smile that will break out. You know, that's how they learn.
Yes.
And they grew up distrustful and lacking in confidence and stuff like that. And I thought, yeah, this is inhumane. And then at the other end, the elderly in care homes, in isolation, family not allowed to visit. I mean, think of that famous picture of the late Queen,
Yeah.
sitting alone in the cathedral during the ceremony for her dead husband. No person, let alone the Queen, deserves that sort of isolation and loneliness. And again, the Swedes very early on recognized even that and said they're dropping their restrictions on visits by family to elderly people in care homes because the human cost of that is too great. They don't want old people dying deaths of despair because of loss of contact. And those photos of people looking through the windows sadly at the outside.
I have another one.
How can you do that as a human being?
There was one of the most beautiful stories I heard was there was a woman dying in a nursing home, a grandmother, and no one was allowed in to see her. Family weren't allowed in. So her granddaughter, who was about 16, 17, used to break in at night, sneak to her room and spoon her because she'd get in bed and because she didn't want the grandmother to die alone. I have written about this, but to me, it's that's what we should build statues of to.
I agree, absolutely.
Who actually goes, I refuse to let my grandmother die alone. I don't care if I die of COVID. I don't care. And these are the things that give me hope. And these little stories need to be captured.
I could not agree more. To me, in a sense, even worse than the photos of the cops firing rubber bullets and the tanks on the streets and the helicopters in the sky, even worse than that are stories of Queenslanders' hospitals. Queensland's hospitals are for Queenslanders. Stories of a young couple just come back to Australia, flew into Brisbane airport, and the woman had to be rushed into maternity and give birth. And the mother is not allowed to hold the baby in her arms for X days because of the COVID isolation requirements. And the dad was not allowed to be present. Do you remember that story? And the dad was not allowed to be present in the room for that. The stories of not being allowed to attend your family funerals, not being allowed to attend weddings, not being allowed to celebrate. I mean, the idea that the government tells you who you can be intimate with, under what circumstances, which place. You know, we are products of the generation that told the government to exit our bedrooms.
Yeah.
And here they are coming back into the bedrooms again. And of course, other than to themselves, the infamous Professor Neil Pants Down Ferguson. He imposes the rules and violates it in terms of his girlfriend. And the other politicians who are doing that. So it brings back the rage too much. Let's not talk about that.
I'll bring the book back up. So the thing with this book, sorry, I know you're going to speak, John, but the thing with this book is that you're re-editing it, and you and John, and then we'll market it through BAM Book Company as well. But you're re-editing it so you're updating it. Is this what we're doing with this book?
Updating it, expanding it. I think we want to add another 30,000 words or so to it. That will involve bringing in additional things I've written since then. Bring it up to date with the WHO. Hopefully, I'll be able to put in something about my project that I'm working on as well, in terms of why the choices between reform and replace, and just generally tidying it up until more recent times. It may involve even cutting back some of the chapters that have been overtaken by events or replaced by subsequent articles which reflect more up-to-date thinking on that. Because I think there's much, how can I put it, much more receptivity to the essential lines of the argument in the book than at the time that it came out. I should add, because it is important, two things to this. I think the existence of the lockdown skeptic as it originally was, and then the daily skeptic in the UK, which was founded by Toby Young, now Lord Young of Acton, and Brownstone Institute in the US. I think it was very crucial for the community of dissenters to get together and discover that there were other serious, well-credentialed, like-minded people. And I think from reactions to a lot of articles in these, it is clear that these two outlets in particular, and others, but these two in particular in the English-speaking world, helped to preserve the sanity of a lot of people when they were asking, has the world gone mad or am I going mad? And they realized there are actually other serious people thinking the same. It's not just my instincts if I'm a quote unquote common person. It's not just me if I'm a scientist. There are other scientists, but they were not allowed to be given a voice. And it's only later that we learned the extent of the directed coordination between governments, media, tech platforms, social media, the massive censorship industrial complex, which they wanted to even broaden and extend until yesterday. The Prime Minister was intent on that and then had to withdraw in the face of opposition. They are going ahead with that in the UK. The Trump administration has been very vocal in attacking cutbacks, limits to free speech in the Western countries as part of their attack on civilization erasure in terms of the values we share and should be committed to. I think the loss of any free speech from any free speech restriction vastly exceeds any possible gains. And in terms of the title of the book, I think you can count on the fingers of one hand the number of times that a government has been given additional powers and it has actually relinquished those powers. It's always a one-way street. More and more powers on more and more subjects to do more and more things. And the second thing is, any government that has powers that can be abused will abuse them in time. If not this government today, then a successor government in the future. If power can be abused, it will be abused. If power can be misused, it will be misused. And it will be misused by authority against citizens. And therefore, that old saying that we took for granted and don't use anymore, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, I'm afraid is true. And we have a fight on our hands to reclaim our essential liberties, to reclaim our freedoms, and to hold governments accountable. An unfinished agenda for me is a lack of accountability for those who perpetrated these crimes of government upon us. I think you need accountability for three reasons. One, the sense of justice is innate and deep-grained in human beings. We need that sense of justice appeased. Two, it is impossible for victims and their families and loved ones to find emotional closure until the perpetrators have been brought to account. And three, perhaps most importantly, the only as well as the best and most effective guarantee against a recurrence of this madness is to punish those responsible at the top levels, so that future would-be perpetrators will know that they will be held to account. If they get away with it today, we can guarantee others will repeat the same thing in the future. So I think that agenda remains unfinished. It may need a generational change of political leaders before they're prepared to open it. But that was one of the earliest broken promises by the Albanese government, the promise to hold a royal commission on the whole COVID business.
But who would bring charges against them? I mean, it seems like the courts
Successor government. Successor government. Our governments today are very good at apologizing for things that were done 200 years ago.
Yeah, 50, 60 years ago, thalidomide.
They seem incapable of apologizing for things they do themselves. Frankly, at much more that they apologize for things they are doing and they are responsible for.
I think it would be a sign of a great leader if you could say, look, we did this under duress and we made mistakes. Just accepting mistakes at the
Either
human.
duress or
yeah.
the wrong information, or we panicked.
Yeah.
We regret it.
Yeah.
We take it on. It was our fault,
Yeah.
not yours. You were right.
Sorry, John, you had a question?
Yeah.
So you believe, Ramesh, that some of the perpetrators of this, senior bureaucrats and so forth, should be jailed as a result of their malfeasance or dishonesty during this period?
Only after a free and fair trial.
So what is your millions of Australian children were injected with a poorly tested vaccine, as they call it, which was experimental and very poorly tested. What's your response to that? What do you tell parents who went ahead and had their children vaccinated, many of whom now regret it?
Well, I don't think you can blame the parents so much. You know, it takes an exceptional person to resist government edicts and fiats, and firstly to open the mind to the possibility that the governments are not acting in good faith. I mean, who would have believed ahead of this that our governments would be saying to the media, even if this claim is true, you must not publish it because it will promote vaccine hesitancy. So I think the media is just as culpable. It's seduced by clickbait. They abandoned their historic role of holding governments to account, of telling truth to power, and they fell into this willingly. I mean, there's just a topsy-turvy world in so many different ways. So I think we need to do that, and they need to accept responsibility for the fact that there's much more openness today to outright quackery because of the loss in trust in government, for which they are more to blame than anything else. They took that trust and abused it. So I don't blame parents. And that's why I think it's important to hold the top leaders in the health sector and in the political sector to account. That they live the rest of their life in disgrace. I don't necessarily want them all in jail, but I do want them named and shamed and retreat into anonymity and non-entity in disgrace for all the damage they did to us. And why was Djokovic banned? It was because he contradicted their main narrative. Here was the fittest, healthiest tennis player in the world, unvaccinated. They couldn't have him leaping and winning an Australian Open. But wasn't it wonderful, that photo at the end of the Australian Open final the next year when he won it? And you had the Moderna representative, Moderna sponsor, and big sign on the back as he's collecting his trophy. That was worth it. That was so worth it.
They kept him. I was a part of that protest. We camped outside the refugee hotel where he was in, a really shitty, crappy little hotel. And in the windows, there were other refugees who'd been there for weeks with their hands on the window, basically just bathing in the recognition of trying to get some interest in their case because Djokovic was there. It was unbelievable, and it wasn't just the politicians. Like everyone said the Serbians would come out in full to support him, but they didn't. There was only a handful of Serbians that came. The rest were wanting him removed. The rest were backing the government. It's fear is the corruption we really dealt with, how fear took over everything. And then you've got to wonder, how deep is this fear? Is this a fear of death? And if you truly fear death enough that you'll betray your love of your fellow man, then maybe this is a lack of God in your life, a real deep faith that there's something more. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out where this immense fear comes from that they're allowed to do it. I mean, there's still lots of people in the community who were devastated that they weren't allowed to come to Christmas dinner.
On the other hand, Michael, 50 years from now, someone will say, Alex Hawke banned and deported Novak Djokovic, and people will say, Alex who? But no one will, and everyone will know that Djokovic is
right.
the greatest tennis players of all time, if not the greatest.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So,
yeah, anything more, John?
It just amazes me that people aren't more angry. That that there hasn't.
That's the one question everyone asks. That question wherever I go, but people are going, "Why aren't people angry?" It's so clear that things.
Which is why we need that accountability, and we will get it, just not in the immediate generation of leaders who made the decision.
I see. So it'll come out. Yeah,
they're all complicit. They're all colluded.
Yeah.
So who's actually going to hold them to account? But
well,
once they're gone from the scene and they realize that there's people's anger, and if you as a mainstream party are not prepared to respond to my anger, then okay, I'll vote for other groups that do want to do that. So we have to channel our rage and anger into the political process, because at the end of the day, the democratic politics is still the least worst form of government that we have known. And let's face it, our previous system delivered good outcomes. Following process, respecting liberties, encouraging diversity of opinion, encouraging policy contestability. They delivered a hell of a lot of good outcomes. And we need to get back to that. So
I think they also got out of people's lives, because when I'm going through these country towns, they're all dying. All the shops are up for lease. And so I've got nothing against the migrants buying up the businesses. The businesses are dying, and they're going, well, we'll make it work. And they're only just given an opportunity, they're taking. Why not? But I think if the government and all the regulations got out of the way of the people, the entrepreneurial strain in most people will get back to work and start fixing it and start making these places flourish. I really feel it's the regulations and all this that are just, I meet so many business people that say, I can't do a business in Australia. There's just too much regulation, too much red tape. It's a nightmare. I can't make money, which is essential to growth. Anyway, I just want to say this has been a fantastic interview. I'm absolutely honored to have you on. It's so lovely just to sit here and listen to you. It's quite incredible. And so I want to thank John for bringing you on. And it's
been a pleasure.
Sorry you're not in a great studio in like Fox or CNN.
Right. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to a repeat after we have the Australian second edition out.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks, Michael.
No worries. We're going out with a song called Exodus, because over these last few years, I've seen a lot of people saying, oh, I'm leaving, I'm going to live in the bush. I'm leaving, I'm going to live in the bush. They're all telling me this. But people don't realize the great outdoors is a barbed wire fence. Most things are locked off. So it's the reality versus the myth that they think they can go out there and live in state forests. So this song is written to them. But I think the exodus isn't so much they're looking for a new place to live. They feel that the government at the moment, since COVID, is taking us in a direction that's not conducive to our souls. And so they're sort of looking for alternatives. And I think that's why Pauline Hanson is coming to the rise, and other things like that. All these other things, yeah. It's a very interesting time to be alive. John, do you want to have any final say before we go?
No, thank you very much, Chef.
Oh, come on. I gave you the whole thing through to you, buddy. You look so good with that light. Look at you. Take care, Ramesh. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your trip out west.
No, I live on the road now. It's a modern world. So I think last month we reached 6 million people. There's only 2 of us in a 1987 bus with a Starlink, a couple of broken mobile phones and a laptop. This is the future of media. It's cheap to do, and people want to hear real stories. They just want to hear real opinions like yourself. They don't want to be lied to anymore. They're not sure what the truth is, but their bullshit meters are running like crazy.
And contrary to what the MSM argues, there actually is a lot of market and reach for long form podcasts discussing serious issues at length.
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating. Thanks, guys. This is Exodus. And I'll see you tonight with the case about Duggan, the Australian political prisoner at the moment, Duggan. So we're doing a discussion about him. See you tonight.
And will you send me the link to this, please?
And next week, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. As soon as it's done, I'll send you the link. Take care.
Okay, thanks. Take
and
care.
lots of shorts. I have a list of shorts, man. You're going to be the short king.
And next, sorry, I should have mentioned Colin Lilly is on next week. He's Jacinta Price's husband. He'll come on next week.
Wow, man, that's cool.
So that'll be great.
Yeah.
He's just done a new documentary on Australia, so that should also be a great interview. So thank you.
That's a great couple. Okay.
Good night.
Take care.
Yeah, no worries.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye. This is Exodus.
Chang bought a van and decked it out, showed us all, had all he needed. Could park it anywhere, free as a bird. But when he flew, he found out fast that the great outdoors is a barbed wire fence. I'm not staying here when the ship goes south, and the shit seems to be already here. I've a backpack with all my needs. Trouble is, when I dream, all I find is that the great outdoors is a barbed wire fence. I'm sure my grandfather left freedom here, unless my eyes were open when I was born. But this world has left me blind. Is that right? Mother, am I blind? I'm sure I smelled freedom once in the backwood forests of your eyes. Hide, you said, hide with me, or how else will we ever live free? There's an exodus heading out of town. Their faces are up, but their eyes are down. There's a sun that seems to be shining upside down, and around and around, upside is a barbed wire